Hey, every guy and every gal. That's a weird entrance. Hey, everyone. My name is Brent. I'm going to talk to you today about hacking web apps. I'm a security consultant at Solutionary. A little bit about this talk is, looks like we just lost that. Is it still showing over there, Adrian? Every time I...
It's showing on mine. It's showing up on the screen.
All right, hang on one second. Good times. Okay, there we go. So basically, the whole purpose of this talk is very high level. If you're interested in getting into InfoSec or you're a programmer and you want to learn how to make your stuff secure, I'm going to kind of show you what I do as a security consultant during a typical assessment, basically from the kickoff call all the way to report delivery. For the trolls out there, just taking the information I give you today doesn't automatically make you a hacker. It does take time, and you do have to practice and learn what you're actually doing when you click buttons. So there's a few things that have to happen before the assessment actually starts. We have a kickoff call, talk to the client. We actually figure out, okay, when does this happen? What are the limits? Is denial of service in scope? Is it out of scope? What is the scope? Like, what are the websites that you're going to allow us to attack? If we happen to kill your stuff while we're doing it, who do we call in the middle of the night and give that fun phone call to? Something that I've learned the hard way as a newer consultant was didn't gather enough evidence during an assessment. So make sure that you gather plenty of evidence as you're going through, because a report is expected at the end of the assessment. And it's never a good thing when it's a week past the end date and you have to call and ask for access again because you forgot to screenshot something. So, evidence gathering, I'll tell you a few of the tools that I like to use. I know there are several options out there, but again, these are my personal preferences. KeepNote is my first choice. It's available in Kali, Windows, as well as the Mac OS. You can basically put screenshots, you can script things inside of it. When you're done, if the client wants all of your raw notes of everything you found, you can simply export it to HTML and just send it right over to them. It's very easy. Here's a screenshot of how I like to do my evidence gathering. So, for example, if you have several hosts that you're looking at for a single assessment, then I'll make a page for each host and group vulnerabilities that way. Or I'll just simply do it by vulnerability. And you can see that I have the like the unsupported operating system, that's a dark red. I would consider that a critical, and so on. And that's just a way for me to get a quick visual reference of where I'm at in the assessment. And by the way, if anyone has any questions while I'm going, because this is going to be a decent amount of information thrown at you, please let me know, ask questions. Also, if you do ask questions, I have a few things that I will throw at you. So I guess that's a good thing. They're not knives, I promise. Evidence gathering. So whenever you are collecting evidence, you're going through doing the assessment, you want to make sure to document what you sent to the host and what was received, obviously. So you want to make sure HTTP requests and the response for each vulnerability. That way, when you deliver the report, they can actually replay that vulnerability during the remediation. So, yeah, thanks. Any unscheduled downtime or issues, so if you happen to knock over a service and you let the client know, make sure you document that in the report as well as in your notes. Changes in test data. So if you happen to be working in a production environment and you have to create new accounts or you're altering data, make sure you let them know, hey, I created this account, if you don't have the permissions to go back and remove it yourself. Those are just things that kind of make it easier for the client, and of course, the whole purpose is to make them happy so that you can get the job again. And so something else, I have not made this mistake, but I know others who have. If you find a really cool hack or something that's just so stupid, but you were able to get shell on a host or something, do not post a picture of it online. You can get in a lot of trouble with non-disclosures unless you sanitize it or something first, but just be really careful about that. So screenshots, make sure that whenever you are screenshotting something, you want to make sure that you're focusing in on what's important. You don't want to do your entire screen and then try to throw that in a report because it's not going to be legible. For example, here's a screenshot that I got for a full database dump for a bank. And so it's good evidence. However, if I were to take this screenshot and paste it in a Word document and print it out, you're not going to be able to tell what in the world it is. So one of the ways that I try to improve that, where the client can actually read what I'm giving them, is you can see in the gray box where I have the username, that part highlighted. That is the request that was made, and then I'll do something similar with that response. So I would take just a small section of that database dump and put it in a similar format so that they can read it much easier. Any questions so far?
Just highlights really, there were like annotations and stuff.
Well, you'll put plenty of annotations. So, for example, so like the HTTP request, in the report, you will say, we'll call out SQL injection. We'll explain what SQL injection is, and then we have a findings section that says we discovered that this parameter is not properly sanitizing input. We put this in here, and it gave us this. And then under that, that's where we will put like the actual request and response. So, heads up, by the way. Oh, almost. Okay, so something else with that. So if we'll go back. So we'll say the username is vulnerable to SQL injection, for example. So you also want to test the password. Is the password parameter vulnerable as well? What about login? Is that vulnerable? Make sure that you're testing every parameter that's available within that application. Because they will ask you, okay, so, well, username was vulnerable, what about password? If you say, well, I don't know, I didn't test that, that's going to sound really stupid, so make sure you test everything. I've had quite a few people ask me, okay, so how do you know what to look at? There's so much stuff, what do you know to look at? First thing I would suggest is a methodology to go by. OWASP has a great methodology for assessing web applications. It basically considers every facet of that application for you to go check. Now, again, this is just something to help keep you on track. Make sure you're not limiting yourself to only doing what's in that checklist or that methodology. For example, if it lists everything but your methodology that you've adapted leaves out like remote file inclusion or something, make sure you're testing for that. Just don't limit yourself, just use it as a guideline. So we'll start getting into more of the assessment type things. So we've talked about kickoff call, we've talked about documentation and reporting a bit. So one of the things that I always like to do when assessing an application is I want to look and see what's out there for anybody to go find on Google or any open source intelligence, which is what the OSINT stands for. So it's incredible the amount of free information you can get as an unauthenticated user on an app or for any sort of, especially larger like Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. They're so big that they have such a huge digital footprint. It's crazy what you can find out there. It's very time consuming, but it can pay off quite a bit. And again, if they've been compromised before, or if someone uses the same credentials for this application, for another site, like for LinkedIn, for example, all the information that's coming out with the recent LinkedIn breach, check those out. Are there emails from a company that you're assessing right now? Look at those credentials and see if they're valid for that application. So talking about that, there have been several assessments that I've done where I've found developers that have asked for help on development forums, and they actually post the actual database schema, and they will allow some random person access to the database. The person says, oh yeah, give me an account, I'll log in, I can fix this, whatever. And they say, okay, cool, and they will post that. And this is from 3 years prior, and no joke, it's still active. You find it, the post is so old, it's been archived by Google email archives. You find it in there, or you find it in a development post, and it still works because they forgot to disable the temporary account they made for the person that said they would help them. And so, yeah, it's ridiculous. More on OSINT, there are a few tools that I'll just name. There's so many out there, but a few that I use on a regular basis. Discover by Lee Baird. It's an incredible tool. He's updating it constantly. And then you have tools that help scrape web results for you, like MetaGoofil. There's even Recon, NG. So many different tools that are available. And I know all of those, I think Discover you have to install separately. I don't think it's part of the Kali rolling distribution, but it's very easy to install, and it doesn't require many dependencies, so you shouldn't have issues with that. Any questions so far? Cool. You guys need to calm down just a little bit, just saying. So, automated scanning. Why do you run automated tools? You're supposed to be a hacker. Okay, so, and I'm addressing this because every time you give a talk somewhere, 10 people could love it, and then you always have the one troll that can always do everything better. And good for him, right? So, well, just running an automated tool doesn't make you a hacker, but there are so many things to look at as a security consultant doing so many assessments that basically we use this to help find low-hanging fruit. And we don't just use that. There are several other steps that we take beyond automated scanning, which I'll show you, but this gives us a pretty quick view of, the security posture of the application. So, again, it's a huge time saver. And something I do want to point out is a vulnerability scan is not a penetration assessment. Kind of a pet peeve of mine is you have certain companies that will go and sell a pen test, but all they're doing is some automated security scan. And everyone, I hope that you go around repeating this all the time. I doubt you will, but if you run into anyone that says, we're going to give you a pen test, but it's really just a vuln scan, like smack them in the face or something, because they have, there you go. Okay, so automated scanning tools. There's so many out there that are free, such as OWASP, OWASP Zap, and many more. There are a few new ones in Kali rolling that I haven't had a chance to play around with yet. But I like Nessus. It's really good by Tenable. IBM AppScan is also a very good tool. Burp Suite Pro, you're going to hear me mention that a few times. I love Burp Suite Pro. There's so many, you can do active scanning, you can do manual testing, and so many things with it. And another one that I use too that I don't really hear a whole lot of people talk about is NIC2, which comes installed in Kali. It just checks for, it does basic scanning for default files, default configurations, CGI settings, and so much more, that it's a pretty quick tool, and it'll help you find some easy entrances or easy vulnerabilities really quick. So if you're assessing an application that's built on a framework, congratulations, you will have a pretty easy assessment, I feel like. such as WordPress or Drupal, Joomla, and so on. I love frameworks because they're open source development. They have so many plugins that people can make for them, and a lot of time those plugins have pretty easy vulnerabilities to exploit. So you have tools like WP Scan made specifically for scanning WordPress sites. And so this will give you, it'll tell you, hey, this is outdated, they have these plugins installed, and you can even enumerate usernames. So right away you have a list of every single username registered with that WordPress site that you can begin brute forcing. If it's not some sort of framework and you're kind of hitting a dead end and you don't really have much to go after, you can use OWASP dir buster, the directory buster, and basically it takes very large dictionaries and it will do a brute force to find any files or directories that might not be linked through the application. So. Again, any questions about anything yet? And I'll leave some extra time at the end too for questions. We'll continue with automated scanning. So a few pro tips. Whenever, say if you are using something like Nessus or OWASP Zap or something, don't just put the application URL in there and hit go. I mean, you can, but there's a chance that you're either going to miss something or you're going to shut something down and it could be bad. You always want to make sure that you're going through and looking at settings such as how many connections at a time. Make sure that you're not flooding the host with too many connections. You want to check for, do they have a function that they don't want you to scan? For example, if there's a contact form, is there going to be some poor guy that when he comes into his office the next day he has 10,000 emails because your automated scanner sent the contact form 10,000 times? Yeah, Adrian likes doing that. So check those things, and you make sure that you're going through and actually setting those things in the scanner. I've actually had this issue quite a few times. A client will have a 404 page that's custom, and when you look for something that's not there, instead of saying error 404 not found, it will be a 200 OK with a custom landing page. And so when an automated scanner sees that, every single thing it throws at it, it's going to come back and say, hey, this page is there. And that's a nightmare for going through and trying to clean up to find what's actually legitimate. So just a quick tip, you can usually go through pretty quick and find if they do have a custom error page or custom 200 instead of the 404, you tell the scanner that way you're not having to go through and clean up all this junk. Login process. Something that I don't think I have a slide for this, but I want to tell you, whenever you're assessing an application and you are doing it as an authenticated user, always ask for 2 sets of credentials as an admin level and then 2 sets of credentials as a standard or a standard level user. That way if you lock out an admin account, you still have another one that you can get back in with, and you're not having to wake them at 2 or 3 in the morning asking them to unlock an account. So always verify false positives. Don't just assume everything the scanner found is legitimate. So if it says there's cross-site scripting, actually go and replay that request in something like Burp Suite Pro and see if it actually is a legitimate vulnerability. So many times, no matter what automated scanner you're using or how good it is, there will always be false positives. And then once you have everything configured and you're ready to let that run, then magic. I could do it. I don't know. That's so funny. I could sit here and watch that for like a minute. It's hilarious. Shia LaBeouf. Okay. So, and again, I'm kind of walking you through the things that I do as a pen tester with an assessment. So once I've found some of the low-hanging fruit with the automated scanning, I take that and then I begin picking it apart manually. So that's kind of how I've set the talk up. That way, as you go back and review these notes later, hopefully you can sort of take the same process and it'll help you. That way you're not jumping back and forth and maybe forgetting some things. So again, with the automated scanner results, things that are legitimate, make sure that you document those. That way you can show the client, hey, this is what was sent, and this is what came back, and how I determined its legitimate vulnerability. And so don't just stop there. Like, can you take that further? So if there's a SQL, if it's shown that it's positive for SQL injection, just get some sort of an error where it's showing like Oracle errors or something like that. Take it further. Can you take it so far that you actually get a shell on that host? That's the value that C-level executives want to see, and the guy that is having you come in for that department, they want that stuff because they could be doing this, that way they could get more budget for their department. So you want to take things as far as you can to show the real threat and the real vulnerability that's there, so that this guy in his department can get the money to actually fix this stuff. Again, Burp Suite Pro. There are also other alternatives, and these are just proxies. Basically, you request a website through the browser. It goes through the proxy and shows you everything that's going on in the background, and then it sends it in and out to the internet. So what you can do as you're looking through requests, like say you're looking at a login function, with Burp Suite Pro, you can take it and you can say, okay, well, if I change this user ID to another user ID, can I become that user without knowing their password? Can I fuzz the username for SQL injection or cross-site scripting? So those are just all the things you can start to look at through proxies like Burp Suite. There's a tool in most of those. In Burp Suite, it's called Spider. So basically, you give it the URL, it starts scanning everything that's linked within that application, and it gives you a visual map of everything that's available that it knows of. Content discovery takes that a step further, where it starts to sort of brute force and look for known directories and known file names that might not be linked in the code that was found during spidering. So make sure you're running both of those tools if you use Burp Suite Pro, or even the free version of Burp Suite, I believe, also allows those tools to be used. Again, some free alternatives. You have Peros, which is a newer tool in Kali Linux, and then OWASP Zap and Fiddler, I think. There's so many free ones out there. So just check them out in your lab and figure out which one works best for you. Okay. You have a question? Like, I've used all of those. I like them. I think one of the reasons I'm more apt to use Kali is because it's just how easy it is to find help. So if something crashes and I'm having dependency issues or something, for me it's where I'm trying to do stuff so quick and get through things, it's easier to find help forums generally for Kali Linux. But I know there are some, like Mint. I've got friends that use Mint and other things like that. They're great, very solid distros, but I usually, for work purposes and time purposes, stick with Kali. So, yeah, I guess it's personal preference on that, really. So, any other questions? Hey, heads up. Well, I don't want to knock that computer. This is yours. What's that? It's a phone charger. I've also got some like little micro mouse with pads and stuff. No, I'm throwing them at you if you interrupt me and ask me a question, Adrian.
I'll move this way and you go next. Oh, you see these guys do next.
Yay, he made the team. Derb, what's
DIRB, that's a DIRB command line.
the
Like DIRBuster. But if you run it for the screen session, you SSH in someplace. I just find it really convenient to use and run this in the back. Sometimes,
instead of the GUI, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it helps.
Sometimes the view's a little hard to get around it.
Yeah,
It kind of gets bogged down. Like,
yeah, and suck up resources. So one of the things to look at when you're starting to pick the application apart through the proxy, you want to view the server responses. So whenever you send something, look back at what's coming back. So is it running IIS? Is it running Apache? Does it tell you what version is installed? A lot of times it will. If it's an older version, you can use searchsploit and check and see what vulnerabilities are out there. So then you can start going after those vulnerabilities. I've already talked about parameter fuzzing, which is basically if it's a username and it's expecting an actual username, start throwing special characters at it, SQL commands, things like that, cross-site scripting, and see how it responds to that. Is it actually filtering those inputs or not? A few things to look for, a few of the many things to look for with cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, especially if you're looking at an application for a bank or somewhere where there are customer transactions of some kind. Those are things you really want to focus on. SQL injection, you've heard me say that many times, LDAP injection as well, or command injections for operating systems. Those are all things you want to check out. Local and remote file inclusion. This is one of my favorites. I've compromised more hosts because they allowed file inclusions than probably any other vulnerability out there, leading all the way up to shell. So check that out. Can you upload a web shell? Can you use cross-site scripting to bring something malicious in that will help you escalate your privileges? And again, if you're unfamiliar with any of these terms, unfortunately, because it's so high level, there are so many free videos and things on Google. I hate to sound generic like that, but if you're just getting into this, make sure that you search these things. You can teach yourself so much for free. So unfortunately, I can't go really in depth with these things for this talk. One of the cool things that I really like about Burp Suite Pro is when you're going through and you find a parameter you want to fuzz, there are preloaded lists for things like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. You can also, I know Movix and a few other guys have some well-known lists out there that you can download for free. And you can throw those in there and fuzz that parameter many, many times with many different techniques and payloads to see very quickly if it's going to handle anything it shouldn't. And again, Xenotix by OWASP. Has anybody in here actually used Xenotix by OWASP, cross-site scripting scanner? I know it released a couple years ago, but I don't really know, it's hard to run across people that actually use it. I recommend it. It's a really cool tool. It actually runs 3 website engines in parallel on the same screen. So it kind of emulates like Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer, because you can throw the same payload at one. It might not pop cross-site scripting, but the other 2 will. So it's a really nice tool to see based on what engine, the Gecko engine or whichever ones, how they interpret the payloads that you're sending. So OWASP, Xenotix by OWASP is a really good cross-site scripting tool to validate those vulnerabilities. And this is just a quick screenshot of specifying parameters in Burp. So you can see the parts that are highlighted in orange. Those are the parameters, and you can either do multiple, or personally, I like to focus on one parameter at a time so that I can know exactly what's happening. I suggest that to you as well, unless for whatever reason you're doing some sort of a Hail Mary and you're just trying to get anything back from it that you can, which in my experience, is never a good thing to try anyway. So I recommend focusing on one parameter at a time. This kind of goes back to the reporting that I was talking about earlier. You want to save all of the posts or GET requests that you send for the report for things that you found vulnerabilities for. If you found something, if you found a parameter that you think might be vulnerable to SQL injection, actually save that post or GET request as a secondary, like a text file, and then run that text file through SQL Map or SQL Barbecue or some other SQL injection tools that are installed on Kali. This will be, you can do very extensive and exhaustive tests on each parameter, and it will usually give you a pretty high level of confidence if it is or isn't vulnerable to SQL injection or like OS command injection. Cool thing about Burp Suite Pro, again, I promise I don't work for that company, I just really like the tool. They have a really cool inclusion that you can run for SQL Map, where it basically takes that request for you and runs it automatically, and it saves you the steps of having to create a secondary file, go to the command prompt and type in the commands and run it. It saves a few steps. Manual testing, again, a few things to look for that surprisingly guys have talked to you don't really check for. And the URL, is it actually passing sensitive information? I've seen websites that actually pass the username and the password, which is usually poorly encrypted, in the URL. You always want those to go through post requests instead. Session IDs, anything that could be leveraged, you don't want that going through the URL. You want it to be a post request, basically. Comments in code. There's been sadly a few times where the developers have left the database name, the internal IP, and a few other really useful tips for me, well, not for me, but for themselves in the code. All I had to do was right-click and view source, and then I had a few extra hints to help me along the way. Again, that's that manual process can be time-consuming, but it pays off. And then usually a lot of the programs like Burp Suite you can just right-click and say show comments, and it'll go through and show you every single comment of every page that you've pulled through the proxy. So, and now, because I've been talking so much, prevent death by PowerPoint is a very happy dog. No. Aww. Anyway, any questions? I know this is a lot of information. I'm really sorry. There's not really a even more high-level way that I can think of without it being a completely useless talk. Did you?
This goes back to, I guess, associated with scope. Have you ever run into an issue where unit test and admin says, I don't care, he wants web apps done. But in the end, what he really wanted was a web database like router tested, so he would go to the new router. And that's not something that web app.
So if you couldn't hear, basically the question was, you start the assessment, and then towards the end they say, well, actually, we wanted you to do this instead. Yeah, there have been issues like that, and a way to sort of hash that out from the beginning during the kickoff call when you're talking about scoping, you just have to be very clear and say, well, make sure, like, is this the URL? And then is there any, we always ask, are there any special things you'd like for us to focus on? So that's one question we ask. If we've had a static code review done, we say, what things stood out to you? Were there any red flags that you want us to focus on from your code review? So just make sure you ask very specific questions up front to make sure that there's as little misunderstanding as possible regarding scope. But yeah, we have had that happen before. Basically, we'll say, well, this is what was discussed. And then, we usually will try and make the client happy, time permitting. But we've kind of figured out now how to prevent that from happening. So that's a good question, though. That's an irritating issue if it comes up at the end. Yeah, it's real fun. Like, hey, it's been 2 weeks, but yeah, you didn't do what we wanted you to. So, you can't really use expletives on the phone unless you want to lose the client. But anyway. Come see me when I've got something for you too. I don't know if these things would go that far. We could try. This guy says he's ready. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not an athlete. Okay, so back to manual testing. Authentication is obviously a very important part of the application. Are there URLs or functions that you found? Let's say as you're logged in as an admin user and you have like application.com/admin/updatepassword.php, something along those lines. Can you still access that as an unauthenticated or a non-admin user? Those are some privilege escalation things that you want to make sure to look at. When you log off or something times out, can you go back and grab that session cookie and replay it and now you're logged in again? That's not a good thing. Silly as it sounds, is there a log off feature? You'll be surprised at the amount of people that actually forget to put a button that says log off that actually terminates the session. So you want to look for those things. They sound silly, but you actually run into that quite a bit. Password requirements. Last week, I was assessing an application, and I was able to go through and change the password to 1. Just a single numerical character 1. That is terrible. Why even have a password, right? So you want to recommend, I'd say probably at least 8 characters, requiring uppercase, lowercase, number, and special character. That's pretty standard, right? So if they're not requiring that, if it is something terrible like a single 1, call that out. That's bad. You could brute force that pretty easy, probably in less than a second. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering what can you use to brute force something like a web application or something with, Hydra is good. You can also use proxies like Burp Suite Pro. There it is again, saying that. But you can throw a full password list. You can even throw username lists at it and try them and brute force those. Can you have multiple sessions of the same user at the same time? Some people don't really consider that a vulnerability, and it might not be. If you're just logging in to check, something trivial, and it's not necessarily something important as a bank account, it might not be a vulnerability. But still check and let the client know, hey, this is informational level, but we were able to log in as the same user at the same time with different browsers. Now, if it's a bank, you could see where that might be more important, because let's say you're logging into your bank account, and you're checking your stuff, and all of a sudden your session expires because a malicious user had your credentials and they logged in. Well, that kind of gives the end user a red flag. Okay, why did I just get logged out for no reason? So that kind of helps you understand why that might be more of a vulnerability depending on what the web app is used for. And then password change process. When you change your password, best practice is to either have to log in again or to give your current password. If they let you change your password without requiring your current password, I would report that, because that's weak. Weak sauce. Look at, again, I've talked about this a little bit. You want to look at the host, not just the app. So again, if it's running an outdated version of Apache and there is a denial of service vulnerability, or if it's vulnerable to Heartbleed or something like that, you want to check that out too, because that might be a different way for you to fully compromise that host, and you don't even need the application to get in. Admin portals. I love it when I find an Apache manager open that's not locked down to an IP, because then you can brute force it. They don't lock you out usually, so you can brute force. Now you've got access to their Apache, you upload a custom WAR file, and now you have compromised the box. So those are things to look for as well. Directory browsing. I found sensitive information through directory browsing, usually through some federal clients. Another fun one, I don't get this very much, but when you do, it's ridiculous because it's so easy. HTTP methods put enabled, where you tell it put, and then you put your code, and it actually puts your shell on their host for you, and now you've owned the box. It's great. And then if delete is enabled, you delete it, and you take care of it. Otherwise, tell the client, I put this on there, can't delete it, you might want to take care of it so your box isn't open to everyone. And then as I mentioned a second ago, heartbleed, shell shock, directory traversal, check for those things. And again, Nmap, I'm sure everyone's heard or used Nmap at some point. If you're looking at the host, is it only port 80 and 443 that's open? Or do they have SSH, SMTP, all these other services that they don't need? Those are things that you want to report on. If it's just a web server, you only want those web services open on that box.
How do you handle critical issues? Do you address the issue immediately or wait till the
If it's critical, for example, depending on what if it's SQL injection, or if I was able to actually upload a shell or something that was very easy, highly likely and critical, what we do is we'll put together a report of that single vulnerability immediately, and we go ahead and escalate it to the client. That way, hopefully by the end of the assessment, they've had a chance to fix it, and then we can retest it for them. Because the whole point is to help make them secure. We don't, not necessarily to make some guy go home and cry at night because you told him his baby was ugly, because he thought he had a great website, but it was terrible. But we also want to help them make it stronger too. So that's a good question. So yeah, if it's critical, some people will escalate highs and criticals. Usually just stick with criticals. So personal preference, I guess, or whatever the client asks. SSL TLS settings. So if they have SSL2 enabled with very weak ciphers, and it's a website that accepts credit cards or payments or something, you want to look and see, are they using correct encryption, supporting correct ciphers, or are they all weak ciphers with known vulnerabilities? SSL scan, as I've mentioned there, that's usually my go-to. In Cali, Qualys has a cool scanner too online. Only caveat to that is it's public and they save your results. So if it's something that you're really worried about third-party disclosure or anything like that, I would probably not use it. But if it's just a quick thing that you don't really care if they save the results, go for it. File uploading features, as I was just mentioning, yeah, thanks for the giggles at my stupid picks. I probably laugh at them harder than what I should, so I appreciate the giggles. So file uploading features. If there's a file upload, so a lot of bank websites, other things, you can create profile. Everybody likes to have a custom profile with your own picture or something like that. So they have to enable file upload capability for you to actually upload your picture. So if it accepts a .jpeg or .png or something, can you take a custom shell that's supposed to be .php and then just add .jpg to the end of it and it accepts it? Sometimes yes, sadly it does. So try that. Can you obfuscate? Can you take that code and encode it in a way where web application firewall or whatever method might not pick up on it? So you want to try those things. It's amazing how easy it is sometimes to simply upload a shell through an upload function. And as I was talking about evasion against antivirus, IDS, IPS, and WAFs, web application firewalls. More fun to say WAFs, but whatever. You want to obfuscate polymorphic code, anything that you can change. Again, can you change the file extensions, file wrapping, anything to trick the application to let you throw something on there you shouldn't. One of the biggest things that I want to point out is as you're learning this stuff, you want to know, really know what's going on behind the scenes. So when you push go on something, what's happening? Because if you knock over a service and the client says, "What did you do?" and you say, I don't know, click start, that's never a good conversation. So you want to understand what's actually happening with these tools or through your automated scanning, automated testing and things. That way, if something does go bad, you can explain, or you can just simply understand to know when not to use those attack methods. Set up your own practice lab. Never learn this stuff on a client site. I've seen guys get into some really deep water because they're like, hey, here's a new tool. I'm going to try it on my assessment tomorrow. Not a good idea. Practice in your lab, and then when you're ready, go hack some websites. So that's basically it for my talk, guys. I've got some time for questions. Please let me know if you have any questions. If not, you can come see me afterwards.
Just a question. As far as like postmortem or actually even during your analysis, are there any like tracking environments that you recommend? Sometimes we work with large full class ERD, whatever. You start losing the product components.
Yeah, and you just mean as far as like workflow, what have you done, what haven't you done?
Yeah, exactly.
So methodology, I was talking earlier about methodologies. Those are good, a good way for me and a lot of other guys I don't know that do this. It's a good way to just kind of make sure, because when you're doing 3 or 4 assessments a month on 3 or 4 different environments, it's going to get mixed up. For me anyway, it gets mixed up, it gets cloudy. So I have a checklist that I've made through a spreadsheet. And so for each section, like the open source intelligence, fuzzing parameters, it's just kind of broken down, and I can go through and just check each thing I've looked at. And for me, that helps. I guess that's kind of personal preference, but I'd say probably to start, I would suggest like the OWASP methodology for starters. Anybody else? Cool. All right, thanks, guys. Thanks for listening, and let me know if you have questions. Thanks.